when we were going through everything that was happening with COVID and the lockdowns, everyone was all upset. Oh, I can't do this stuff. But I was suggesting, and one of the only ones I know out there suggesting, maybe that was Yahweh trying to keep us set apart. Because we're like, oh, if you have this, you can't go to bars and you can't go to secular concerts. Well, who wants to do that anyway? Maybe this was Yahweh's way of keeping us set apart, just maybe. And so everyone's looking at, they're taking away our freedom and all this. Now you look at the food shortages that they're having. Yeah. You know, when you look at the diseases of the world that come upon man today, much of it is due to overconsumption of foods and also the wrong foods. And many of the food shortages they're having today are the very foods we shouldn't be consuming to begin with. And maybe this is just perhaps Yahweh's way of saving his remnant, his people. Yes, motivating them to can, save, and grow their own food, but at the same time, from keeping them to, or helping them overcome the addictions to their store-bought chemically loaded milk and their factory farmed eggs and everything else. Maybe this is Yahweh's way of encouraging believers to get their own chickens or to find some neighbors that have their own cattle and so on, and or even perhaps growing gardens and so on. Yahweh works in ways that are mysterious to many men. And, you know, the lockdowns, look, I wasn't upset about the lockdowns. I don't want to go to local bars. I didn't care that I wasn't allowed in a bar if I wasn't vaccinated. Who wants to go to, I don't want to go to a secular concert. They're like, oh, you can't go to secular concerts and bars. I'm like, that's not affecting me anyway. I don't want to do those things. But yes, when I was at a supermarket, sometimes, you know, what they called essential businesses weren't really even essential businesses. But this thing with the food shortages, keep in mind, yes. I mean, when a lot of people are telling me now that, oh, we're in trouble because the food shortages are coming and they're right around the corner. They were saying this since the beginning of the of COVID, and there were. I did go to the store and there was shelves that were empty. I acknowledge that, and some of it was food that I wanted, but the majority of food that we have shortages in is food we shouldn't be putting in our bodies to begin with. Oh, because of the war that's going on in Russia, you're not going to be able to get any more Kool-Aid or some Coca-Cola. Thank you, Yahweh. Save a life. We shouldn't be drinking that stuff to begin with. But I understand from a farming standpoint, like now when we get into the things like wheat, with Russia and Ukraine, or that whole area being the biggest importers of wheat and all wheat products that are going to be on certain grains. You know what? I don't eat grains or wheat for years. I don't touch those things. You know, those things aren't that good for us to begin with. You know, and maybe this is forcing people to understand that we need to eat locally and to understand about the local wild greens, the weeds that we step over every day. People are worried about, oh, we're starving, where are we going to get our food? And then they're stepping over 90% of the most nutritious food we can get is the edible weeds that are sprouting out of the floor that people don't really study and know about. Maybe this is motivating them to do that, or to grow some sprouts inside your house. You know, so yes, it's a terrible thing when we don't have knowledge, and the scriptures don't say my people destroyed for because there's a war and there's a lack of food. It says my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And we need, you know, look, here's what I'm saying, folks. There's shortages around the world. If you're relying from some country around the world, if you were relying for Afghanistan to give you your poppy seeds and your poppy seed bagel, and now you can't get a poppy seed bagel because of everything going on in Afghanistan, well, you know what? When I walk outside my door, and I live in a tropical climate, but even when I lived in New York City, when I walked out my door, guess what I saw? Green stuff growing. Even in the wintertime, stuff was growing. Stuff grows where you're at. I remember when I lived in Brooklyn, I used to walk from my house to the train station, and I passed this house, and I used to see wild onion growing right at this house in front of me. Yes, take it during the winter months when there was snow outside, it wasn't growing, but if you know how to do root vegetables, they even grow when there's snow on the ground sometimes. And the thing is, I haven't seen anywhere where stuff's not growing in this world. And when we talk about food shortages and all these different things, you know, some people say they don't have the land to grow stuff. Well, if you have a kitchen, you have sprouts. If you turned around, I have a whole shelf here full of sprouts that you could practically live off of. And water, I mean, water, as difficult as it might seem to get water from the shelves in the store, you know, as far as I know, water is one of the most inexpensive things that you can get. And I'm not an advocate of drinking tap water today, because tap water is loaded with things that shouldn't be in our body. But when it comes to the idea of no water and dehydrating and thirsting to death or drinking tap water, I'm going to tell someone to drink that tap water. And in this country alone, I don't know communities that, you know, when you turn on your faucet, there's no, even during a blackout and a hurricane, you have water. And if you have the option to have a well, that's an even better story, because now the government's not controlling what they're putting in your water. But maybe, just maybe, Yahweh's doing something here, motivating us, because when we go outside, stuff is growing. And yeah, you might not have a mango tree growing outside your house and say, oh, Brother Paul is a mango tree, so look how blessed he is. No, but there's stuff growing outside. And if stuff is growing, that means stuff can grow. And not all of you have a backyard, but some of you have a little porch. Some of you have a patio. Do you know there are mangoes that grows in pots? Do you know that there are herbs and everything? You can grow all the food you need inside your house. There's something, look it up online, called a tower garden. In the middle of winter, no matter where you are, you could be growing all the salad greens you need. So, you know, we need to get wise. Remember, Yahweh says, my people destroyed for lack of knowledge. Lack of knowledge, not because there's a war going on in a certain world and stuff. Now, his plagues created famine, created wars, created disease, and all these things. And that's where people were dying from those things as a result of their sin. But remember, if we have knowledge and knowledge, see, wisdom and knowledge, you know, wisdom is something we could be born with, but the knowledge is something, or even the wisdom is something that we it's a choice. And we have to make a choice of who to believe in. Yahweh's filled us with the book of knowledge right here. That's why Jeremiah says when they went into captivity, plant gardens and eat the food that they produce. Plant gardens and eat the food that they produce. You know, and there's wild food everywhere that people don't know. Go look up Wild Man Steve Brill on the internet, or go look up Eat the Weeds on YouTube. And you see all these different stuff, the weeds that people are taking, weed killer, like all these crazy weed killers and everything else, and destroying the weeds, and all that chemicals from the weed killer are destroying ourselves and our bodies because of the Roundup and everything else. While there's all this food outside and everything else, and it's food everywhere. And as for a shortage of food and things that have come, yes, when you go to the store and the bread aisle has no bread and the egg aisle has no eggs, you might say, well, there's a food shortage, we're in trouble. But I'm here to tell you right now, I haven't eaten an egg or bread in years, and I'm healthy and fine, you know. And as for the fruits and vegetables that we're supposed to sustain and live our lives on, and even animal meat, you know, people can raise animals, they can grow food, and they have that option. On YouTube, there's so much great tutorials on how to do exactly what you're asking to do. There's so many great tutorials out there. And I have a friend that lives in the desert in Las Vegas, and he has one of the best gardens probably in the United States, in the desert, you know, because there's so many tutorials how to do that these days. But I'm telling you this, number one, if green is growing there, probably edible, we don't even know it, but that means you can grow anything there if green is growing there. I've been to Midland, Texas as well. Yeah, so about exactly how to do it, well, you know, I'm not going to get too much into it now, but I will tell you that there's a lot of tutorials on the internet, and you could just go and type, how do I grow stuff locally in this climate in Texas or so on. A lot of stuff is growing there. And if you don't have a lot of space, you know, like I said, the sprouts you can grow in your house. You could, there's so many amazing spaces. I was telling somebody last night, I used to live in a little townhouse here in Florida, and this fellow that knew about growing said, all the food you need for you and your family for the rest of your life, you can grow in this little space. And at the time I was like, really? And now I'm like, absolutely, because I have more than enough food that I can eat in the space that I'm growing it, you know, now. And, you know, I end up giving so much food away. But, you know, I would, if I was in your situation, I would look at local groups, maybe go on meetup.com and see if there's local gardening groups, go to the local Home Depot or the local Lowe's and see what they're growing in their gardening section, because they're only going to grow what's going to grow there at that time of year. It wouldn't make sense for them to do something else. and maybe speak to the other people that are shopping at those places. Go to local stores that or local nurseries that are growing some things, and look into perennial greens. Perennial greens are wild greens that grow everywhere. Look at the wild herbs. There's an app you can get now on your phone which identifies the wild edible greens that are growing in these different places. There's so much you can do. And yes, based on the environment and where we're at and things. I mean, I continue to learn about growing. I grew up in a city and I didn't know about growing or anything else. And then it hit me that there were doctor's offices in Brooklyn that had fig trees in front of them, fig trees in Brooklyn. And I was like, wow. And I did my research and found out Brooklyn used to be a whole bunch of fig groves. I was like, wow. And I was like, I couldn't grow. I lived in an apartment in Brooklyn. I couldn't grow anything. I didn't have any land. But I know when I passed that field of onions growing, I was like, wow, stuff grows. This is crazy. So I started to learn how to forage for wild food. And I used to go to this man, Wild Man Steve Brill, and go to Central Park and eat the food in Central Park, in this big park, and get all these wild greens. I remember there was this big tree. He took a group of us up there. It looked like it was these red leaves growing on this tree, and they tasted like popcorn. And so there was a whole bunch of us eating off the tree in Central Park. And it was quite a comical thing, but so delicious to learn about all these different things. So even in the city, I would go to local parks and be able to find edible foods and things like that. And then I would grow sprouts. And there's community gardens in big places like this. So I would look in Midland, Texas for community gardens and see where people are growing, and maybe speak to the people there and find out what they're doing and how they're doing it. Maybe even become part of one of the community gardens. But instead of us fearing and worrying about food shortages, maybe this is Yahweh's way of motivating us to do something about it for the first time in our lives. And look, the first time in my life I've ever had a fresh food right off the tree was a grapefruit. It was when I was 20 years old in San Francisco. Prior to that, I had never eaten a fruit freshly picked from the tree. Now, there are some people that live in the Caribbean and the islands, and they think that's absolutely crazy. And what I think that's crazy now, because I have over 100 fruit trees, is there are people in New York City that I grew up with. They're in their 50s. They've never tasted a mango in their whole life.
Wow.
And this is the way the reality is. But there's so much great things we could do out there, and I'm excited. I get so excited because when I garden, it shows me and connects me to the land, and in Yahweh, all of his metaphors and everything about gardening and weeds and growing and taking care of the ground and tilling the soil. And I'm doing that now, and it's such a blessing that I go out there, and it really helps me feel close to Yahweh, and learning. Even today, right before I got on, this brother called me up and he was talking to me about things that he's done or has been doing, and he knows a lot about them. And he was telling me some things. I wrote them down, and then later I'm going to write them down better and just prepare myself for the coming season. And, I know I can't grow spinach in Florida in the summertime. It's too hot, but I can grow okra. So I planted okra. I know I can't grow lettuce, but I can grow string beans. So I planted string beans, and we figure it out, and we keep learning. And I know so much more than I knew last month. And there are a lot of people out there that are doing it. So it's not something we have to discover ourselves.
I found the answer. I like to pray.